Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Carrie. I do some facilitation with Roses and Tina.
Tina, I'm involved in some programs.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks, Tina. And welcome to feedback one, the feedback loop one of the Murrumbidgee LHD Safe Space co-design, and this is the Griffith Safe Space co-design. So thanks, Tina. So we'd just like to begin with some acknowledgements. We'd like to acknowledge the original occupants and traditional custodians of all the lands we're meeting on. So when we do these things virtually, we're often meeting on many lands, but particularly to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people of the Murrumbidgee region, and to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and their emerging leaders, and also to acknowledge and pay our respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are joining us today and that are participating in this co-design process. And in the context of developing suicide prevention services, we also like to acknowledge lived experience. So Roses in the Ocean is a lived experience of suicide organisation. And as we know, the Safe Space co-design is being actively participated in by people with lived experience, and we just want to acknowledge the incredibly and uniquely valuable expertise that people with lived experience of suicide bring to these co-design processes. Thanks, Tina. So just a quick recap of where what we've done so far in this region. So we've had the lived experience focus conversations. We've then also had the health professional focus conversation. So that's bringing small groups of people together to have those kind of more face-to-face kind of one-on-one kind of chats. We've then had the lived experience co-design session, which was a half-day session, which we did online as well, to really start to explore what some of the unmet needs were in terms of people accessing ED for suicidal crisis, and also to get some of the best and brightest ideas about how to meet those needs. And so we're now at the stage of having feedback loop one, where we have this recorded webinar. We'll also be sending a survey out to make sure we get the broadest kind of community input into this co-design process. So the purpose of this feedback loop is to really make sure we have captured what has been shared during these initial co-design sessions, and as I said, gather some broader views and experiences, and then also to help prepare for the next stage of the co-design process. Thanks, Tina. In terms of the perspectives we have in the room, we always know that it's important to get a broad range of perspectives, experiences and insights when we're doing co-design. And in the context of suicide prevention services, what that means in terms of people with lived experience is capturing the experiences of people who have had suicidal thoughts, people who have survived a suicide attempt, people who have cared for someone who has been suicidal or attempted suicide, and those that are bereaved by suicide. Thanks, Tina. And then in terms of what we're feeding back to you today, when we did those focus conversations and then the lived experience session, we walked through the emotions and feelings experienced by a person seeking help through ED, as well as those people who chose not to go to ED or would not because of past experiences, and explored the reasons why they felt that way and what needs they had at each stage. And we did that, we sort of mapped it according to what we're calling the key touch points of accessing ED for suicidal crisis. So that's finding, arrival and initial assessment, the waiting period, treatment, and then also leaving that process. So the following slides highlight the key points of discussion and feedback from the first phase of this co-design process, and everything that was shared in those earlier conversation has been captured with the most common themes shown here. And so Tina's going to talk you through those touch points in terms of the feelings and why people were feeling that way. Thanks, Tina.
So we're now going to have a look at the information that you provided us about what it's like to access help through the emergency department during a suicidal crisis. And we had 3 small groups, and we've brought together all of the information from each of those groups. And the first thing that we asked you about were your experiences on trying to find help, trying to find out what to do to access help through the emergency department. And what you told us, you shared a whole lot of feelings associated with that experience. You can see that there are words of different sizes here on this slide. And the words to describe feelings that came up most frequently, they're the ones that are quite large in this word cloud. So one of the really common feelings that came up was that when people were trying to find out how to access help, they experienced fear and they felt really quite embarrassed by the situation. There were lots of other feelings that came up as well. So some people felt quite surprised. There was confusion, worry. People felt terrified. People felt desperation. Other people did have feelings that were a little more positive when they were trying to find help. So some people actually felt confident, happy, but then other people described feeling like they were just being pacified, that it was quite stressful, and that they felt quite lost and confused when they were trying to find out how to access help. So we asked you, why were you feeling this way? And you gave us a whole lot of reasons for these feelings, but these are just a few comments that came. A lot of people spoke about the fact that they were when they were trying to find help, they were around people that were part of their community and who knew them. So one person said, I knew everyone who worked in the hospital. The girls that I went to school with were all nurses. Another person explained that they felt the way they felt because choice and control were going to be taken away from me. And another comment on a similar sort of theme was that if I'd been better informed, I would have presented before it got to the point where that choice was taken from me. Another person commented, I wasn't helped very much. It was my friend who talked me through things. So basically they felt like if it hadn't been for their friend, they wouldn't have been able to find the help that they were after. Another person commented that they were worried about confidentiality in a small town. So then we asked you about your experiences when you arrived at the emergency department and during that initial assessment. And again, there were some feelings that came up quite strongly that a number of people mentioned. So they were that people felt ignored during that initial arrival period. Some people felt relieved once they arrived. But again, that feeling of embarrassment came up quite strongly. Some other feelings that people talked about was feeling terrible, feeling fear, feeling shocked, numb, unsafe, humiliated, depressed, annoyed, disregarded, devastated, confused, and cold. But there was another person who spoke about how they felt quite calm once they arrived, and they realised that they found that way to access help. So we asked you why you were feeling this way. And again, you provided us some really, really good information to help us understand those feelings. So one person explained, I expected they would welcome me with open arms, and I had that flipped on its face. Another person explained, I was embarrassed about who else would see me when they were visiting the emergency department. Another person said that they felt like a prisoner or like a really annoying kid. We were also told that, you know, the reason people feel these strong feelings is having hope and having someone take it away is worse than never having hope at all. And another thing that came up was the idea that some people felt quite unsafe. And one woman explained, scanned from head to toe by 2 male security guards. There was no consideration of previous trauma. So we then asked you about your experiences during those periods where you're waiting, and there can be lots of different times when a person's trying to access help through the emergency department, that there can be quite long periods of waiting. And when we asked you about how you felt at that time, the really strong feeling that came out in the conversation was that people felt unsafe. Some other feelings that people had, people felt cold, they felt alienated, scared, invisible, anxious, bored, shaking, clenched jaw, very tense, but then also there were a range of emotions, and someone told us that when they were waiting, they actually felt quite calm. When we asked you why you were feeling this way, you gave us you really helped us this experience. So one person said, there was nothing there. I was just staring at blank walls. Another person explained that while they were waiting, I read every magazine that they had. Another person said that at that time they had racing thoughts and commented, I haven't got anything to distract my mind. Someone else explained to us that they were thinking, who are these people? There's no information, you're just left there waiting and bored. And another person explained to us that they said, I was told that if I didn't go in voluntarily, I would get a forced admission. So then we asked those of you that experienced treatment after you tried to access help through the emergency department, we asked you what that was like and what sort of feelings you experienced then. And there were a huge range of feelings that came up out of those discussions. So some of those feelings was that it was confronting. People felt confused, misled, lost, angry, ignored, guilt, horrified, scared. One person said they felt like a criminal, betrayed, violated, and trapped. Another person said they felt jolted by the experience of treatment. Fear. Some people felt livid, undignified, unsupported, disappointed. One person described the experience as being like a roller coaster. Some people felt that they were manipulated during treatment. Another person commented they felt stupid or horrified. But again, we did have some more positive feelings come up. Somebody said that while they were receiving treatment, they felt safe. So again, a real range of experiences there. When we asked you why it was that you were having these feelings, some of the reasons that you gave us were, it's really hard to answer questions and overwhelmed, and you've been waiting for hours. Another person explained that while they were in treatment, they cancelled all my appointments and I didn't think they were going to let me go. Another person said, it felt like I was losing my mind because I'm locked in here and I have no idea what's going on. Who were feeling, I guess, ignored or undignified and unsupported, one of the comments, and not myself, or the spoken to about receiving treatment. They said they made. So then we asked you about your experiences when you were leaving, and what that was like for you. And the feelings that came up here, the really strong feelings that came up was people felt fear when they were leaving and people felt angry. Some of the other feelings that came up for people when they were leaving was they felt apprehensive, they felt irritated, terrified. One person used the word whatever to explain how they were feeling at the time. Some people felt it was all pointless, felt underwhelmed. Some people felt overwhelmed. And there were some positive feelings that came out as well. So one person described feeling a sense of understanding, and another person felt quite excited when they were leaving hospital. So when we asked you why you were feeling this way, a range of reasons came out. So one person explained that the reason they were feeling quite terrified or quite confused, they said, who was I now that I had a mental health assessment? Did it change my identity now I had a mental illness? Another person explained that they had these strong feelings when they were leaving after treatment because community mental health had a reputation for not following up. A person who was supporting a person to go through this accessing of help through the emergency department explained that when they were leaving, she had really strong negative feelings about not being able to be with him every minute of the day to make sure that he is okay. Another person explained that when they were leaving, the safety plan was Valium and they just assumed that I would take it. And also another person shared with us that after they left, after receiving help through the emergency department, and that after receiving treatment, I went back to doing all the things that had got me there in the first place. There are also some general feelings that came up just about the process overall, and they were feelings of feeling unsure, and also strong feelings of being abandoned. And some of the other comments that came up about the process, one person talked about the way that their friends responded to what was happening for them. And she said, I lost friends who couldn't cope with what was happening to me. Another person who had supported their mum to go through the emergency department during a suicidal crisis says, I don't know what we would do if it happened again, because mum won't go back there. We also had people who were involved in the focus groups who either hadn't supported, had done that in the past, but would never consider doing that again. And so we asked you if you could help us understand why you wouldn't access help through the emergency department. And some of the reasons you gave were you're feeling pretty ordinary as it is. Why would you want to go? Another person spoke about empathy. They don't actually understand how we feel. Another person commented that they wouldn't go back to the emergency department because I have not had any positive results. Missed appointments, no phone calls. They do not do half the things that they are supposed to do. Another person said that they wouldn't go to the emergency department because the negative judgment is huge. And another comment that reflected what a lot of people were feeling during the focus groups is that it's just a waste. They just stick you in a room and leave you alone. So we then moved on from looking at, I guess, the feelings that people were having during this process of trying to access help through the emergency department and understanding your needs. And we got you to really focus on what needs a safe space would need to meet. And you came up, you helped us understand some really diverse needs. So in terms of practical and physical needs, you said you need basic amenities, so food, water, tea and coffee and bathrooms. A big one that came up for people was that you want distractions while you're waiting. A number of people said they would like the ability or the amenities for sleep or rest. There were comments made that a good night's sleep can make a big difference for people. Also, the ability to keep your own personal items on you to provide comfort. So it was identified that, you know, the distress people felt when they had their personal items taken away from them during treatment, that this is something that needed to be considered, that people actually need to be able to keep these things with them. And you said you need a nice, relaxing environment. In terms of needs for connection, people spoke about a need for validation, and lots of people spoke about the need for peer support by people who have a lived experience of suicide themselves. They said they needed staff trained in an understanding of mental health, because people really felt that sometimes their needs weren't met because the people who were with them during their attempt to access help didn't actually understand their mental health needs. They said, people told us that you have a need for a calming, stress-free process, to be treated with empathy, to feel cared for and nurtured, and you need follow-up after somebody leaves the space, so some kind of contact and support after people leave. People spoke about the need for a connection to the outdoors, so the need to be able to access greenery and nature. People needed reassurance and also company and companionship. So the idea that people would like someone just to talk with or just to sit in silence with if need be. In terms of the information that people need, people said that the system needs to be explained to people, and a number of people spoke about the need for advocacy. They felt that sometimes when they were in a suicidal crisis, that they maybe weren't as able to speak up for themselves as they need to be, and maybe didn't have the information to be able to advocate for themselves. And so the idea that somebody who can advocate on people's behalf would be important in terms of needs. Also, people said that people need to be realistic and transparent about the timeframes and expectations. And people need to be informed and have it explained to them, this is what will happen next and why. Other needs that came up for people were, there was a strong need for privacy. So privacy and confidentiality is something that a lot of importance is placed on in the Griffith area. And they also have a need for immediate support. So support when you ask for it and not having to wait for hours. People spoke about the need for help after hours, so outside the 9 to 5 period, and also for continuity. So people felt that they would like some information to be shared so that they weren't treated as, each time that they presented in a suicidal crisis, that wasn't treated as a separate incident, that what was happening for them would be understood in the context of their past experiences and their previous requests for help. People spoke about needing to avoid complacency for people who access regularly. So the idea that people need to be treated equally, and they need to be treated equally well every time they present. And that's really important, that people aren't made to feel reluctant to present because they're starting to, for instance, not be listened to when they're seeking help. Okay.
Thanks, Tina. So as you can see, there was just incredibly rich information that lived experience participants tapped into and really brought to those conversations, and it was fantastic, and it really then set the foundation for the sort of the positive element of this whole co-design process, which is designing a local safe space that will meet the needs and wants of the local community. Thanks, Tina. So we began with looking at what are the values and principles that are going to underpin just the way of working, everything about the space in terms of the physical environment, the type of staff, the way in which people are supported, the types of connections that are made. And these are the values that were agreed upon. There were fantastic conversations where it generated a lot of values, and then they were sort of boiled down to these ones on the left, and then there were some other ones that were also discussed. And these are just a draft set of values, and they will be firmed up as this process continues. So the agreed values were accountability, privacy, respect, love, inclusivity, and acceptance. And then some of the other values that were discussed were equity, professionalism, transparency, safety, confidentiality, choice and control, dignity, non-judgmental, open-mindedness, trust, personal space, honest and open. And you can see how they link very much to what people were talking about in terms of what they would need to have a better experience in accessing support during a suicidal crisis. Thanks, Tina. Then we also got the local lived experience participants to start to draft a set of principles. And these are really those, almost like the sort of the rules or the laws that govern everything about the safe space that really can never be broken. And they're also something to really be there. So when there are some particularly tricky situations or ethical dilemmas, they can always be referred back to these principles that hold for all possible scenarios within the safe space. So 1, confidentiality at all times. This is a non-negotiable. 2, we are open and will welcome you at any time with empathy and respect. 3, we will listen without judgment and ask what you need. 4, everyone is important, diverse and included. 5, every person's story is valid and we recognise the diversity within that. 6, we are here to support, love and walk beside you. Thanks, Tina. So then we got to the real blue sky dreaming part of this whole co-design process for people with lived experience, and that is we asked people to bring their very best and brightest ideas about what a local safe space would ideally look like and feel like and be like for people accessing support. And so in terms of the environment, we've got that it feels homely, that it's like a cafe lounge, a house or other off-site space, so a separate building on the hospital grounds away from ED or preferably off hospital grounds. Discreet entrance. It was noted that a designated smoking area would be very helpful, particularly when people are feeling distressed. There was also talk about how to identify the building, and so someone suggested a coloured door to signal to those who know about the space without overt signage. Art was something that came through strongly as a theme as well. Sensory items, so as Tina was describing before, people were talking about the need for distraction, so that was one way that people said that need could be met. Lounges, so comfy places to sit. Outdoor areas, for example, a Zen garden. Puzzles and colouring books for distraction as well. And to ignite all the senses. So there was a recognition that really that whole experience of touch, feel, smell, sight, taste and sound, complimentary snacks, water, tea and coffee, music, support animals such as a dog and even more ambitiously a pony, private spaces so that there'll be times when people might need to have separate conversations or confidential conversations, and open spaces where you can connect with other people and not to feel isolated. So there's both sides of that coin there. There's also the need for books and information to help people learn what's going on for them. So there was discussion around people needing to understand more about their situation and perhaps build capacity to self-manage. And then also a silent, calming sensory room. A barrier-free space where there are no barriers between staff and guests to remove any perception of segregation. So that was talked about in terms of that, really trying to equalise that power differential that often is part of the experience of accessing traditional clinical support, and that it's safe for everyone in the space. So a recognition of the various ways in which people can think about safety, so physical safety as well as emotional and psychological safety. Thanks, Tina. And then we explored really what the experience should look and feel like for people. So someone to welcome upon arrival and to calmly sit and chat. A sign-in process that obtains consent but maintains privacy. So there was discussion about not wanting to have those kind of conventional sort of communication tools and information gathering tools, that they're often a barrier when people are in crisis. For people supporting and learning from each other. So that's that idea of in lived experience, sharing lived experience and the value of that. A range of options depending on personal preference. So self-directed choices. So that was very much a strong theme about self-determination and people being able to choose for themselves what's best for them. No triage process. A buddy system. So a go-to person when in the space, like a peer kind of buddy system, validation of someone's feelings and experiences, and staff you can walk up to that can walk you up to the hospital if you need to or you want to go. So the idea that a peer worker could be walking alongside you in that process. And also there was a strong sense that as you'd seen earlier, that people didn't feel that there was that continuity and I guess sufficient follow-up. So the follow-up within a day or two of people accessing the space. Information for guests and carers to understand the situation. An easier way of identifying emotions. So when people are asked how they're feeling, so for example, images and visual cards rather than conventional clinical assessment of how people are feeling. Welcoming this sort of sense of calmly being able to sit and chat. Processes for when someone might need other forms of support. So a recognition that sometimes people might have higher needs or different needs, and being able to have a bit of a protocol in place for people to be able to access that. Regular sessions as a group and community. So there was that understanding that this is a community-based initiative, and that it needs to be nested within that community. Community participation and fundraising. So there was some really cool ideas around how to involve local community groups and organisation, for example, a bake sale. And also that a guest has choice over the activities they'd like to engage in. So yet again, that idea of self-determination, choice and control, and also support for carers. So even if it's just to take a break, while recognising that the primary purpose of a safe space is to support people in suicidal crisis, there was also a recognition that there is needs to be a collaborative approach, and that carers need to be recognised as playing a role. Thanks, Tina. So in terms of staffing, so the ministry requirement is that these are non-clinical services that will be staffed by specialist suicide prevention peer workers, what they're calling SP peer workers. And this also came out strongly in the ideas for the design from lived experience co-design participants, that these spaces need to be, the space here needs to be staffed by peer support workers. They also recognised that there could be a really important role played by volunteers, like I was saying before, seeing it as a community-based organisation, that volunteers could play a role. Also recognition very strongly that staff need to come from a diversity of backgrounds and including ethnicity, culture, gender and sexual orientation. Also that staff have an awareness of and understanding of cultural connections and sensitivities. So that sense of peer workers being culturally competent in the way they work. And then also there was a suggestion of partnerships with, for example, universities, so perhaps student placements, and also care van as well, and then local high schools. So again, it was strongly coming through that idea that this is a whole of community effort, that this is a community-based initiative, and so therefore to include the community, draw on the existing resources. And in terms of access, opening hours, just as much as people need it, outside of business hours particularly was emphasised, and also assistance with transport if required. So there was this recognition that transport can just be the most fundamental barrier to people accessing this kind of support, and that people wanted to make sure that those barriers were overcome. Thanks, Tina. So that brings us to all of the information that we wanted to share with you. As you can see, incredibly rich information from the lived experience participants in this local co-design process. They really, really did just bring so much of their experiences, but just the depth of insight that Tina and I were really struck by that. And so we just so deeply appreciate what lived experience people in this region have contributed so far to the process. We now have time for a Q&A if anyone watching this live has anything to ask us. If not, then we would encourage people to really spread the word in terms of getting the broadest amount of people involved in this feedback loop, get them to have a look at the webinar, send the link to the survey as well. Really do that through your informal networks. Lived experience people often have those informal networks, which are a great way to get broader community input. We want to hear from the voices that are missing from this process so far, and it will really sort of enrich the kind of model that is developed if a really broad range of people get to have some say. So we'll give you a couple of minutes if anyone's got a Q&A. Is there anything you wanted to add, Tina? Or?
No, I think you've covered it quite well, Carrie. I completely agree with you. It was a privilege to listen to the experiences of people who lived experience in the Griffith area, and they're incredibly generous in sharing and helping us to really get a feel for what it's like for access help through the emergency department. So fantastic ideas for how their safe space really meet their community needs. Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions here. So Julie's asked, is there a time frame for when this facility will become reality? Thanks for that question, Julie. It's super important to know that. I think often in co-design processes, what we hear is that people get very involved in them and then feel at the end that they're not quite sure of where all of this fantastic information and ideas that have been generated, where it actually goes. So while we can't speak on behalf of the LHD, we know that there is a commitment to get these services up and running by the ministry, and also for the LHDs as well. So what I would say to you is to watch this space in terms of when we all come together next time. That'll certainly get some more information from the LHD if there are any timeframes, but certainly my understanding with all the other LHDs so far is that there's a real commitment to get these services up and running as a matter of priority. And then we have a question from Georgie. How can I share the information via Facebook with link added? It's not one of my strong suits, technology and how that works, as well as social media. So what I can do is I will ask Bridget from Roses to let us know about how to do that. I don't know if Tina, I don't think Facebook and technology is your thing either particularly.
My understanding is that you just...
Sorry, we're having a bit of trouble with your link, with your
link, like copy and paste the link or type the link into your... My understanding is, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That you just type that URL, so that link, into your browser, and it will take you to the SurveyMonkey. But we'll get Bridget to confirm that and
yeah,
send that to people.
Yeah. I'll get Bridget to email you, Georgie. So thanks for that. And then Georgie's also asked, do you think drug and alcohol, so I'm assuming you're saying people with substance use issues there are struggling mentally be included, or will there be a separated facility? So that's a really important point that you raised there, Georgie, because People are often talking about, well, is an exclusion criteria people with alcohol and other drug issues, or people that are intoxicated. It comes up over and over again. So that really is something that will be up for discussion in the combined session when we bring people with lived experience together with health professionals. That will be some of the things that will be firmed up in that process. So it'll be really important for you to raise that if it isn't in that combined session. I would say to you that the ministry requires a no wrong door approach. So what it would be about is, how do you take a no wrong door approach? How do you work in alignment with those values and principles that you've started to draft? And so you might have to come up with some creative solutions about how you hold to those values and principles and way of working in terms of supporting everyone locally. We've still got a couple more questions here. And there's something in chat. Let me have a look. And can we, from Kate, can we join roses in the ocean? Awesome question, of course. And yes, absolutely. There's a lived experience. There are lived experience collectives and advisory groups and a whole lot of things that you can plug into with roses. I'm not sure if you've done the Voices in Action or Voices of Insight training there, Kate. If you have, you will be plugged into the National Lived Experience Collective. But what I can do is I'll get Bridget to send you directly an email to give you some information about how to connect with Roses to continue this amazing advocacy that you're all providing here to your whole community, and really to everyone with lived experience nationally in participating in really what is systemic change for people experiencing suicidal crisis. So thanks everyone. I don't think there's any more questions. If you do have any, if there are any that pop into your mind, just feel free to email Roses. We really appreciate you taking the time to participating in this webinar. We also really encourage you again to spread the word as widely as possible, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you.